Hello class. This week we are going to be talking about the introduction to art, and this is your very first recorded presentation. It's best if you listen to the recorded presentation instead of just viewing the slideshow, because this way you will get the whole amount of information. Okay, so for this week we are working on the introduction to art, and we're going to be looking at these questions. What is art? Why do people make art? How do people make art? What is art used for? And where do ideas come from? So, let me ask you this. And as an aside, please pay attention to the images in all of these presentations, because the images are very important. They all have things to add. So let me ask you, what is art? And what isn't art? Is there good art? Is there bad art? Does art have to be pretty in order for it to be good? If art is ugly, does that make it instantly bad? What if you can't sell your art? What if you just make it just to make it and you don't give it away or sell it and it just kind of hangs out in your closet? Think about it. Those are all things to consider and things that form people's definitions about what art is and isn't. In the image, you see an illustration that has a combination of text and images, and the text says, "Only dead fish go with the flow." Think about what that means. And when you look at this image, you see a man who is tattooed kind of heavily with kind of traditional type tattoos. If you're into tattoos, they are Sailor Jerry style. And think about, as an example, tattooing. Do you consider that to be art or not art? Or does it depend on what the tattoo is and how good it is? So when you look at this cartoon, on the left panel it says it's not art, and on the right panel it says that it's art. Think about what you're seeing on the left panel and what it's used for. Guys will be much more familiar with this device than females will. And on the right, you have the same thing, the same object, but it's taken off the wall and turned upside down. And it went from being just a useful object to being art. And this is how that happened. What you're looking at is a very, very important piece of art. It's called The Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. And it was found in 1917. And Duchamp was an artist, and at the time, in order to get into art shows and whatnot, and it's still this way a lot, you go through a jury, and a jury basically looks at your art and judges whether it's good or not, and good enough to be in the show. So the jury judged his art as being not good and told him he couldn't be in the show. So what he did was change the definition of art by creating his own show. And he went out and he found this object, which, if you haven't figured out, it's a urinal. And it was discarded, and he picked it up, he turned it upside down, he signed it and dated it. He signed it with a pseudonym and put it on a pedestal and gave it a name, Fountain, and called it art. And this created a lot of discussion because it brought up that whole idea that anything can be art, depending upon how you present it and how people receive it. So art is in the eye of the beholder, and that's going to be important later on. But just because you call it art, think about, is it really art? And who decides that? Okay. So our working definition of art for this class is art is communication through the senses. That's a very, very broad definition, and we're going to break that down. And we're going to talk about this painting in a minute. So I'm changing the slide, the painting's still there. I want you to look at it and think to yourself if you can identify which figure represents which of the 5 senses. Your 5 senses are taste, touch, hearing, smell, and sight. So give yourself a minute and look for cues. And then I'm going to give you the answer. Normally we do this in class, and it's really fun for people to try to figure things out. Okay. We'll start with taste. Obviously, when you're tasting something, you are eating, drinking, using your mouth. So the fellow there that's right in front that's kind of losing his clothes, if you look carefully at his hand, he's holding a wine glass, and in his other hand he's holding a bottle, and all around his feet are food. There's like a melon of some sort, maybe some bread, so he is representing taste. Okay, touch is directly behind him. And if you look closely at that figure's face, you can see the touch has his eyes closed, or maybe he's blind. And he's using his hands on top of a sculpture to feel the sculpture and feel the face on the sculpture. Hearing is to the left of touch. He's the fellow with the big lute, and he is playing music, which is the key art for hearing. And down at the bottom, he has some bagpipes and some other instruments. Smell is all the way over on the right with the red pants. And he's smoking a pipe, which is a smelly thing. And he's also holding garlic, and at his feet are some garlic and onions. Garlic, as you know, smells very strong. And then finally, sight is all the way on the left. It's the old guy with the red hat. He's holding a mirror, which reflects things and which we use to see ourselves. And up to his face, he's also holding a pair of glasses. So what is communication? Communication is the transfer of information. It can be between one or more people. And think about these questions. Think about, can you communicate with yourself? Some ways that you might communicate with yourself might be through keeping a journal or a diary, or taking selfies, or talking to yourself. Also just daydreaming, thinking, all of those things you're communicating with yourself pretty much all the time. Can you communicate with dead people? Of course you can. Most of school is spent talking about dead people and what they've done. And it's still communication, even though it's kind of one way, because they have already created these ideas and, acts and things of that nature that we are discussing. So you're still communicating with them because you're still receiving their own perspectives about things. And then think about all the different ways that we have to communicate. There's the obvious ones, like using your cell phone or texting somebody or, writing a letter, emails, talking, music. But there's also more subtle ones. We communicate through our body language. We communicate through our appearance and our expression and even our scent. Everything. So what are the senses? The senses are how your body takes in information. So you have 5 that we're talking about: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. These are your physical senses. and on the right you have a graphic image that somebody made dealing with the senses. And you can see touch is represented by the hand, taste, you have the lips and the tongue and the throat, smell, the nasal cavities, sight, the eyes, hearing, the ears, and then the whole thing goes into the brain. This is all like a cross-section of the brain where you would see the cerebellum and the amygdala and all those other things. So in visual art is what we do in here. It relies on the sense of sight and your eye. Vision is the primary sense for humans. It's how humans interpret the world and navigate and communicate. Mostly is through what they see. Now, when you are seeing things, and this is part of visual literacy, you look at it, but then you have to do something with it. You don't just look at it, you have to decode it. So look over on the right at the poster and think about what it means. What is it a picture of? It's a hand holding a cigarette. Now, what is that opinion of the cigarette? Is it good or bad, positive or negative? What symbol do you see in the hand? Making up the negative space of the hand is a coffin. Coming out of the end of the cigarette is little coffins going up. The pictures and the colors in there combined create the meaning. Red is associated with danger in our culture, stop, emergencies, and also it's associated with blood and healing and health. And then black is associated with death. So you have these colors that have to do with danger and death as well as the symbols, and that gives you the overall message and meaning of the poster. Music, it's sound, the sense of sound. It relies on your ear. It's a secondary sense for humans. We use our ears if we can't use our eyes. We tune in to voices and noises, and it helps us to orient in our environment. If your ears aren't working correctly, my ears do not work correctly. And sometimes people's ears don't work well if they have a cold or congestion, things like that. It doesn't just affect your hearing. It also affects the way you taste things, and it affects the way that you balance. And you have a harder time keeping steady. You tend to, if you have ears that are not working correctly, you get dizzy, you get car sick, lots of things can happen. Now music, like they do across the hall here, is an absolute wonderful thing, and whether it has words or not, it can be used to communicate through sound. And in the image there, you see one of my absolute favorite musicians, Robert Johnson, who is one of the founders of the blues. Actually, he's the king of the Delta blues. And when you look at the picture, you can tell a few things about him. You can tell that he is dressed up. He looks very well cared for. His hair is done nicely. He's wearing a suit. He's holding a guitar that tells you what instrument he plays. He's smoking a cigarette, so that tells you, think about the last picture you saw. He's kind of, maybe a little edgy. In the back, you see a southern landscape. We recognize the architecture as being like old houses around here in the fields. And in the sky, there are wreckers flying around in the clouds. Now, Robert Johnson has a very interesting story where he always wanted to be a musician, but he didn't have any talent. And when he was a teenager, supposedly he hung out with bands and things trying to learn, and they would chase him off because he was so horrible. And then one day he disappeared, and he didn't come back for a few days. And when he came back, he could sing and he could play instruments. The best one was a guitar, but he played other things as well. And he was really, really very good at it. And supposedly he had sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in order to be able to do this. Robert Johnson's a member of the 27 Club, which is the young, uber-talented musicians that all died at age 27. He was a ladies' man, and everywhere he traveled, he had one or more girlfriends. And the very last night of his life, he kind of he was with a girlfriend, and there was another one there who was there with her husband. And nobody was happy about that. So the one girl tried to poison him, and then the husband ended up shooting him. And that's how he died. And then they went to bury him, and his body was missing. And nobody is quite sure where it is now. If you're familiar with the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The black musician within that movie is based on Robert Johnson. Okay, dance and sports have to do with touch and movement. Touch and movement is more than just your skin or your hands. We tend to think of it as your hands. Your skin is the largest organ on your body, and then underneath the skin are your muscles and nerves. And they all work together, and that creates the sense of touch. It also creates sensation, which is when you feel things, but you're not physically touching them yourself. A sensation, for example, would be being cold, being hot, feeling wind on your skin. Touch is a secondary sense for humans. We are sensitive to touches, but we don't navigate our way around by touching. You can see in the left image, that is your brain and spinal column and all the nerves coming out from it that govern your movements and your feelings. And then on the right, you have one of the wrestling matches, which is an example of a sport. Dance and sports are very closely linked together. Sports used to be considered and well known as being one of the arts. When the Olympics were created, they included all of the arts as well as the athletic competitions. And it wasn't until the mid-1900s that they lost competitions in things like painting and speaking and singing and things of that nature. Culinary arts have to deal with taste, and that is your tongue that tastes things. It's a tertiary sense for humans. Taste is important to us because it's a way for us to distinguish what is safe to eat and what isn't, but we can survive without it. We don't taste our way around like certain fish do. That's how they navigate, is by literally tasting their environment and the waters and realizing, the right way to go, because it seems really strange to us. Culinary arts, you study cooking class. It is not just the cooking of the food, but it includes the way you combine flavors and textures and the visual aspect of presentation as well. Like over on the right here, we have a beautiful little house that would normally be known as a gingerbread house, but in this case it is made out of a cheese ball, and it has like salami and pepperoni and things for the roof, and some crackers and pretzels and things of that nature. Okay, olfactory arts have to deal with smell in your nose. It's another tertiary sense for humans. We depend upon our nose again to tell us what is safe and not safe, and also a little bit for recognition of things. You could probably when things are normal, smell your way around the school. You could smell the cafeteria. You could smell the locker room in the gym. You could smell the biology room and the formaldehyde, the art room and the paint, things of that nature. But we're not like dogs. We don't say hello by sniffing each other's parts. On the right, you have another poster. It says, "Simply love is in the air," and it smells like coffee. And again, that very simple image, you can tell right away it's a coffee cup and it has a heart. Hearts are love, red is love, as well as the danger that we talked about before. Certain smells cause emotions, and we associate certain people and memories and things like that with certain scents. And if we smell it, like if you smell brand new crayons, you might have a flashback to elementary school. If you smell grass being cut for the first time, you might think of springtime and how we get the onions in our grass around here, and it smells different than grass in other places. Whoops. Olfactory artists, what do? If you're an olfactory artist, you design smells. So that's not just perfumes, but everything from the way toothpaste smells to cleaning products to things that are poisonous. Everything has a scent. So how do your senses work? Sensory stimuli wakes up the brain with new information. So if you smell bacon, for example, you start paying attention. That triggers humans. And your brain decides, is this important or not? So your brain would say, hey, are we hungry? Then maybe the smell would be important. If we're not hungry, then it may not be important. And if it's not important, you ignore the information. If it's important, you process the information and you say, bacon, awesome, let's go eat some. Or if you don't like the smell of bacon, you could say, bacon, yuck, I'm getting out of here. If you have too much information going on at the same time, you get overstimulated. It's overstimuli. Your brain doesn't quite know what to do. And that would be like if you're smelling something very strong and you're also at the same time extremely hot and it's very loud and it's very bright outside, and you kind of, because it's so hot, your mouth is dry and you kind of have that dry mouth taste. And that might end up getting you nauseated because you have just too much going on and your brain can't cope with that. So your job as an artist is to engage the viewer in communication. And because we are visual artists, we want to engage the viewer in sight. Therefore, you must wake up their senses and tell their brain, hey, pay attention to this. This is cool. Wake up. This is neat. On the right, we have a painting that at first glance you might just think it's a portrait of a man, but then there's other things that kind of wake up the brain there when you look at his teeth and you realize that his teeth are really little skulls. Oops. Okay. And this is done in many different ways for different reasons. A look at these images. On the left, the young boy, think about what kind of expression does he have? What do you think if he was speaking? What would he say? What emotion does he have? Is he sad? Is he angry? Is he scared? Is he happy? What's going on? And how can you tell that? What part of the picture do you pay attention to figure out how it feels emotionally? And then on the right, an entirely different work, a sculpture of angel wings. And look at it closely. What are the feathers made out of? Why do you think the artist used those things? What are they maybe trying to say by using that type of object to create feathers? Okay, so your first activity for today, and it's already posted on Google Classroom, is a Flipgrid introduction. We were going to do this last week, but Flipgrid wasn't working, but they fixed it. Yay. So your prompt is you're going to introduce yourself, so please say your name, and tell us your personal definition of art. Not the one I just gave you, not one that you Google, but what is art to you? So what you need in order to do this is either a cell phone or your Chromebook so that you could record video. If you don't know how to record video on a Chromebook, please watch the tutorial that's under the technology tutorials. If you're using a cell phone, there is a free Flipgrid app, and I suggest installing it because it makes life a lot easier. Also, if you have your own cell phone, please install Google Classroom because that's the easiest way to upload pictures and videos is through the app on a cell phone. Okay, so your directions, use the link in Classroom to get the Flipgrid. A lot of you have probably used it before because it's a pretty common app for teachers to use. If you haven't used it before, it's very easy. It tells you the directions right away. You can record, and then if you don't like it, you can delete it. Now, for the introduction, what you're going to do is say your name, and that's in part so I learn how to say your name correctly. And then tell us your personal definition of art. You have a few minutes. I have it set for, I think, 3 minutes, but it's okay if it's very short. That's fine, as long as you do it and I know what your name is and I know what your definition is. And then after you have it uploaded, mark the assignment as being done. You won't see it in Google Classroom, but you'll see it on Flipgrid, and I'll see it on Flipgrid, and you'll have it finished, and I can grade it and watch it. So, rewinding and reviewing for today, think about these questions. What is art? Our definition, class definition. What is communication? How many people do you need to communicate? What are your 5 senses? What are the names of the art disciplines that are associated with your senses? And what is the basic goal of an artist? Okay, that is it for today. If you have any questions, you can contact me by email or text. You can use Remind. I'm also going to put up my cell phone number because that is just easier. And I don't really mind if you have it. Because the Remind, I'm not always seeing those, notifications. All right. Well, go forth. Have a good day. Tomorrow you have more.